When Tom Lang called me to tell me that I was being awarded the Stan Moberly Award, I was really speechless. I have known Stan for many, many years and never felt like I could walk in Stan's shadow. And it's humbling to think that my colleagues think I can. When I got out of graduate school 44 years ago, the job was pretty much about fish. Sometime in the 80s, the fisheries managers kind of switched to making people part of the job of fisheries management. But really, the habitat wasn't really entering into the trifecta of what makes up a fishery until later, especially at the reservoir scale. We always knew it was a critical component, and for whatever reason, it never really entered into the daily job of most fisheries managers, whether or not that was because in those days, there were a lot of reservoirs that were new, had high quality habitat, whether the job was getting out of most biologists' comfort zones where you had to talk to people you normally didn't talk to, or you had to move outside your sphere of influence and get up into the watershed. Or from an administrative standpoint, fixing habitat, at least at the reservoir scale, is extremely expensive. So for whatever reason, really the job of reservoir habitat restoration really came onto the scene much later. We're standing on the shores of Lake Texoma, arguably one of the best striped bass fisheries in the country. Certainly one of the very few that has natural striped bass recruitment. But Texoma used to be a destination crappie fishery, and white bass runs were kind of the annual rite of spring for anglers all over Oklahoma and Texas. But sedimentation and nutrification, which is the major reservoir impairment, particularly in the ag belt, have cut off the mouths of many of the natal spawning streams or spawning coves of crappie. The white bass runs have been completely cut off because they can't enter the streams where they run up to spawn. So, we're dealing with impairments that are on a scale that is just absolutely unfathomable. And I think, Texoma, like so many of the reservoirs, even though the fisheries are of high quality now, we're headed for the cliff. And what happens to the economics, the recreational fisheries, once we fall off that cliff is very sobering. Scientists and managers have known for many years that aquatic habitat restoration is critical to creating high quality fisheries. And a national effort is what it was going to take to really have some type of a funding level that would be able to accomplish the goals that we want to see. The first such attempt was made in the early 90s at a summit in Snowbird, Utah. Not much came out of it, largely because the recommendations were prescriptive and top-down. There were some leaders in the Southern Division in the early 2000s that got together to try to reincarnate a national aquatic habitat program. The Southeast Aquatic Resource Partnership grew out of that effort. But really until 2006, where the National Fish Habitat Action Plan was formed, did we really get a concerted effort going. We now have 20 fish habitat partnerships that are based on either species concerns, watershed concerns, regional concerns, and it's a bottom-up effort. And it's been going now for 15 years and with a huge amount of success. It took some doing to get the reservoir partnership formed. Reservoirs were not part of the original program design, and there were some forward-looking fish chiefs I'd like to mention that saw the need for this. Don Gablehouse, Phil DeRocher, Mike Armstrong, Norm Stuckey, Bob Curry, Johnny Morris from Bass Pro Shops, and Carl Hess from the Fish and Wildlife Service put in a lot of time and effort to get the Reservoir Partnership as part of the national program. I've often said that if I were a salmon biologist, I would be vehemently opposed to dams, as those that are should be. But I've been a reservoir biologist my whole career, and in many parts of the country, the lower Midwest, the Southeast, the desert Southwest, if it weren't for reservoirs, we would have very little aquatic habitat, and certainly marginal, if any, recreational fisheries. For us to have a program that is funded for us to meet the goals of a national aquatic habitat restoration program, we are going to have popular support. We're going to have the public behind us, which in turn would lead to political support. And to do so, we need to focus on the things that are important to the public, to the voting public. So people will always need to be part of any type of effort that we're looking at when we're designing a habitat restoration program. Lastly, I'd like to put in a plug for University of Arkansas Pine Bluff. I believe that the next frontier in fisheries management is going to be aquatic habitat restoration and management. And Steve Lockman, Jonathan Spurgeon at UAPB have a graduate program in that. So if you are a student or a young professional looking for some career direction, I would recommend focusing your efforts on getting a habitat restoration management skill set. I certainly need to thank the folks who made the nomination, but most of all, the guys and gals on the ground that are doing the work that I'm getting the credit for. And lastly, I'd like to thank Stan Moberly for his leadership. Here's to you, Stan.